welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are absolutely demystifying one of the most foundational concepts in all of tort law, and that's trespass. We're going to completely break down the invisible boundaries that protect our bodies, our belongings, and our physical spaces, just so you know exactly how the law actually shields you. Let's jump right in. To keep things super clear, we've got a three-part roadmap today. We'll look at trespass to the person, trespass to goods, and trespass to land. Okay, before we get into the weeds of those specific categories, we really need to pin down one absolutely crucial anchor phrase that applies to all forms of trespass. The phrase is actionable per se. So what does this actually mean? Well, it essentially means that in a trespass case, the mere infringement of a right is completely enough to bring a legal claim. You don't need to prove that you suffered some actual injury or, a financial loss. The law considers your personal integrity and your property rights so supremely important that simply crossing the boundary is a legal wrong in and of itself. And this brilliantly illustrates our next core rule. In tort law, a trespass demands an act that is both direct and physical, much like the immediate impact you'd need to shatter a pane of glass. Think of it this way. If someone straight up throws a brick at you, that could absolutely be a trespass. But if they negligently leave a brick on the sidewalk and you accidentally trip over it a few hours later, that indirect harm might be negligence, sure, but it definitely isn't trespass. Trespass is all about that direct, immediate physical boundary break. Moving to Section 1. Trespass to the person, protecting bodily integrity. Okay, let's dive into this, because this entire area of law is built around our fundamental right to simply be left alone, and people mix these two terms up literally all the time. In our everyday language, we usually use assault to mean a physical attack, but in tort law, they are very distinct. Assault is all about the expectation of violence. It's an act, which could even be threatening words or silent phone calls, that causes someone to reasonably fear that immediate physical force is coming. Battery, on the other hand, is the actual intentional, direct application of that force. So raising a fist at someone, that's the assault. The punch itself, that is the battery. And remember our phrase, it's actionable per se, so even an unwanted kiss can technically be a battery. Now, the third element of personal trespass is false imprisonment. And, here's a kind of surprising fact. This can happen without a single finger ever being laid on you. False imprisonment is simply depriving someone of their freedom of movement without a lawful justification. It can honestly be as simple as turning a key and locking a door while someone is inside a room, preventing them from leaving. But of course, not every single physical contact or restriction is unlawful, right? Here we have the legal justifications, or defenses. A really major one is valenti, which is just a fancy legal term for consent. This is exactly how a surgeon relies on your consent to perform a life-saving operation without it being classified as a massive battery. Other defenses include self-defense, statutory authority, which is what allows the police to lawfully arrest someone, and inevitable accident, which is where a defendant had absolutely zero control over an unpredictable physical event. All right, moving right along to Section 2, trespass to goods, protecting personal property. So we're shifting our focus outward from our physical bodies to the things we actually possess. And this begs a really important question. Does the legal term goods include absolutely everything we can own? Well, the short answer is no. In law, goods refers to physical objects, which were historically called chattels. This firmly includes things like jewelry, cars, and even animals. However, the courts have strictly ruled that it entirely excludes human bodies, and it also excludes intangible assets, like claims under a contract. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how cleanly it contrasts this simple tort of trespass to goods with a much broader tort called conversion. Simple trespass just requires a wrongful physical interference, like, say, moving someone else's jewelry from one room to another without their permission. Conversion is way more severe. It's an interference that is fundamentally inconsistent with the actual rights of the owner. Think of selling a library book you borrowed or just completely destroying someone's property. Both torts, however, absolutely require that the person making the claim has the legal right to possess the item in question at that exact time.
So, if you are accused of interfering with someone's property, what are your defenses? Well, the law provides a few. Statutory authority covers things like police search and seizures. Then there's necessity. There's this really memorable case, Crestwell v. Searle, where a defendant actually shot a claimant's dog. Now, why on earth was that justified? Because the dog was worrying a flock of pregnant sheep. The court actually decided that averting that immediate danger to the livestock totally justified the interference. We also have valenti, which is implied consent, like when you park on private land that has clear warning signs, and jus tertii, which basically means proving a third party actually has a much better right to those goods than the claimant does.
Okay, on to our final category, Section 3, trespass to land, protecting exclusive possession. We are now going to examine exactly how the law protects the ultimate boundaries of the physical space we occupy. How do you actually commit a trespass to land? It is way broader than just walking past a keep out sign. The elements include entering someone's land, sure, but also remaining on it after your permission expires, like staying way too long in a hotel room after checkout. It also includes placing or throwing things onto the land. So, pruning your roses and casually throwing the garden clippings over the fence into your neighbor's yard, that is a direct physical act. And because it's actionable per se, it is technically a trespass to land. No way around it.
But wait, how high does that boundary actually go? If you own a patch of dirt, do you own the sky above it? Who really owns the airspace?
So the crucial point is that land isn't just some two-dimensional surface. It includes the soil underneath, the buildings fixed to it, and the airspace above it. But only as much airspace as is needed for the normal use and enjoyment of that specific land. A truly fantastic example is the Anchor Brewhouse case. A development company had these massive tower cranes, and the gigantic arms of those cranes occasionally swung high over the neighboring land. Even though it was way up in the air, the court ruled it was still a direct trespass into their protected airspace. Now, I want to share this fascinating historical doctrine regarding land entry called trespass ab initio, which basically translates to trespass from the beginning. It originates from the famous Six Carpenters case all the way back in 1610. Six carpenters lawfully entered an inn, drank some wine, and paid for it. Everything's fine. Then they ordered more wine and flat out refused to pay for it. The court established that if you enter land lawfully by right given by law, but then you commit a wrongful act while you're there, your lawful entry retroactively becomes a trespass right from the very moment you stepped through the door. Let's move to and see how this builds out our understanding of defenses. How can you legally justify entering someone else's space? Well, you might have a license, which is simply express or implied permission from whoever occupies the land. Justification by law allows police to enter to make an arrest. Jus tertii applies if you can prove the land actually belongs to a third party. And finally, we have necessity again. In one pretty epic case, a ship's captain discharged a bunch of oil onto a shoreline to prevent his ship from breaking apart and endangering his entire crew. The court found that the trespass was completely justified by the dire necessity of saving lives. So, we've covered the person, the goods, and the land. But as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. These strict rules of direct physical boundary breaking and actionable per se doctrines were forged centuries ago. We're talking about 17th century carpenters in inns and farmers protecting sheep. So in our modern age of camera drones flying overhead and digital assets living out in the cloud, how will these deeply historical, strictly physical rules of trespass continue to evolve to protect our privacy and our property tomorrow? It is definitely something to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.